All right, on this episode of Rotten Reviews, we're going to take a look at Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Like a lot of other films I've seen lately, we have quite a disparity between the tomato meter, the critics' reviews, the professional critics' reviews, and the audience score. We have a 78% tomato meter and a 54% audience score. Um, is there a conspiracy behind that? I have no idea. But let's get right into the first page of reviews. The most recent one starts at October 9th, 2019. Now, this film is from 2008, May of 2008. So we're looking at an 11-year gap of time. And I think 11 years is sufficient to get an overall audience read on this. We haven't seen a more recent episode in the Indiana Jones franchise. There are rumors that another film is coming, yet again, with Harrison Ford. I can only imagine that it'll be worse than the last one. It would be surprising if it turned out to be better in any way. So let's get right into it. First up review, 1.5 stars. The only indie movie that I only watched once. An ominous sign of things to come in the entertainment industry. Dear me, that was bad. 3 stars. Spanish. 5 stars. Everything I could ever ask for in an action-adventure movie. Everything I complain about in movies is not shown here. Action from beginning to end, storylines that are easy to follow and very intriguing, characters that you praise being on screen. This is just a fantastic movie to end one of the best movie series of all time. I would suspect that could be a paid review or a not entirely honest review. It's a little too on the nose and just conflicts so wildly with the audience score, but let's move on. 3.5 stars. Though it is not as good as Ark or Crusade, it definitely has its own charm while incorporating the same fashion humor of the earlier films. Yeah, the aliens aspect was weak, but the adventure to get there is more than enjoyable if you can ignore some of the supporting characters' dialogues and actions here and there. Indy seemed fine through and through. He's still the same Indy, just old. The film does play on that aspect quite well, though. People just need to realize Ford aged and accept that. Okay, that's, you can't fault the movie for having an older Indiana Jones. That's natural. In fact, that could play up well in a movie if it were done right. I don't think that's where most of the audience complaint was coming from. I think it had more to do with Shia LaBeouf's character, and it had more to do with dialogue. But we'll get into that. And the next one is 4 stars. It's great to see Harrison Ford returns as Indiana Jones in a new adventure. 1.5 star. This film isn't an indie film, it's trash, avoid. Well, I don't agree completely, but I wish they would have left a little more than it's just trash. I'm looking for a little more. 1 star. So corny. The 80s movies were more believable, and that's saying something. 5 stars. Yes, mud is annoying sometimes, but this is great. Sequel to the series. I wouldn't say that's 5 stars. You're already pointing out a negative, so I would walk back at least a star or 2 stars on that one personally. 3.5 stars. It's not in the same league as the other Indiana Jones films, but it's still worth a watch. I would agree. It's not in the league of the other films. It is worth watching just to see what happens, to see where Lucas wanted to take the character. I think for me, I would put it, to skip us all a lot of reading before I render my judgment, I would put this at 2.5 stars. If I were to give it 3 stars, I would be saying it's good. It's a solid B. But I'd say it's less than that. I'm going down to maybe a C, C plus, maybe. The biggest drawback for me, other than the story was a little bit disappointing, it wasn't as action-packed, it was a little more boring. I think the biggest negative for me was I was expecting to see more of the Indiana Jones that I had seen in previous movies. The character, the witty dialogue, the attitude, and there was a little of that, but not enough. It was disappointing in that regard. Yes, Harrison Ford aged, but it felt like he wasn't trying, like his heart wasn't in it like it had been in the other films. And for me, the gold standard, of course, is Raiders of the Lost Ark. I saw it when I was 12, and I saw it the opening day in the movie theater, and it left a hell of an impression upon me. I had never seen a movie like it, and I was a fan from that day going forward. I must have seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, the first film, 20, 30 times by the time I had graduated high school. No question, maybe higher than 30 times. I didn't get bored with it. I never found it old. I mean, if anything, I had, being an 18-year-old, I could have watched it 2 or 3 more times, and that's very unusual for me. Um, yeah, the effects look a little dated, but that wasn't the drawback for me. The drawback for me on the newer film was that the special effects, while much more sophisticated and much more high budget, and Lucas, of course, Lucas had at his disposal nothing but the best. They weren't used properly, and the special effects, I don't know if it was a decision to make it look more retro, like to not have the special effects look so modern, but some of it was really bad, particularly when Shia LaBeouf's character swung through the trees like a monkey, and that was just really bad and cringy. But enough of me. Again, I give this latest film a 2 star, 2.5, but no higher. And I'm going to disagree with 5-star reviews. I may entertain 3-star reviews and sympathize, but 4.5 star, 5-star reviews, I'm gonna get a little peeved about those, and I'm probably gonna show it at some point. So here we are with a half-star review, the last on this page. This is the worst movie ever made. Never has a sequel done so much violence to its franchise. Aliens, really? Well, no, I disagree. I found the aliens aspect of it a little bit refreshing, a little change up, and I thought it felt like it fit in more with the 1950s time period, where that was when the alien stuff started to show up in the movies more, and sightings and hoaxes increased, and you get your classic ufology started in the late 50s. I think that worked, but it's just the presentation was bad. There wasn't enough setup for it, and the thing about calling the movie Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls, which has nothing in it hinting of aliens, and yet all of a sudden it's bringing in aliens at the end, that was jarring. But I don't think by itself the aliens aspect was the bad part. I think that could have worked really well if it had been more foreshadowed from the beginning, and it didn't just spring it on us. I mean, the title alone doesn't match. I think the title's a little wordy. It does sound like an Indiana Jones title, but again, it doesn't fit with what happens in the movie. There is a crystal skull. There is lore about the search for crystal skulls, but that's not even gone into enough to be worthy, in my opinion, either. There is a lot of lore out there online and in books, even in ufology, about the crystal skulls from South America, from Peru, and other places. A lot of them are hoaxes proven. Some, to this day, people maintain they're authentic. Okay, there is a lot of good material there to mine, and yet for something that was in the title of the movie, it's touched on very lightly. I mean, there is an actual crystal skull, and it does have a type of powers of some sort, but it's just enough to tease you. It's not enough to satisfy you or make you intrigued in it anymore. They really glossed over it, or at least Lucas did, and that was disappointing too. But I don't think the aliens ruined it anyway. It could have been fantastic if it were done appropriately. Um, 3-star review. Skull has lots of potential, and at times it sends us back to Raiders' sense of wonder, but it ultimately lacks the heart of the originals and offer a lacking, unconvincing CGI and set pieces, plus an over-the-top sci-fi storyline that don't belong in Indy's farewell. Okay, I agree with the CGI. I mentioned that before. It was off-putting to me, particularly the swinging through the trees like a monkey. That was further into the movie. Some of the other CGI was passable. I didn't mind the ant hill scene that much, but the monkey swinging really hit me the wrong way. And in the same part of the movie where they were having the truck chase or vehicle chase through the jungle, the CGI on that wasn't up to par. I mean, it was blurry, and I'm saying blurry as in it was too blurry. I guess that was to add atmosphere, but the lighting was too soft, and it seemed too much like you could see the green scene blending in with the real parts of the road. Perhaps some of the vehicles were even CGI, and it just didn't come out as it didn't come out to the level that you would expect from something from Lucas. I think that the over-the-top sci-fi storyline, again, I think that could have worked if it was foreshadowed more from the very beginning. And I think it had that chance right off the bat when the main character, Indiana Jones, encounters a nuclear test site in Nevada. I think that would have been the perfect time to work more of the alien thing in there. But they didn't, and it was kind of a wasted opportunity, in my opinion. Half a star. Crystal Skull is by far the worst of the Indiana Jones movies. This was the film that finally killed the franchise. Well, I agree it was the worst of the series. Before this, I would have said it was the second movie with Short Round. As that's, most millennials, people half my age, they refer to it as the one that had Short Round. I guess that character kind of struck them more. To me, I just consider it the second movie, The Temple of Doom, to be kind of a foray into a hodgepodge of weird Indian gross out stuff with the insects and whatnot. To me, that was like my least favorite. It wasn't bad. It didn't kill the franchise, but Temple of Doom was my least favorite. I would put second favorite after the original Raiders. I would put The Last Crusade. Sean Connery's performance is brilliant. I mean, he was Sean Connery. He was perfect. And he worked really well with Indiana Jones. This one is definitely, I haven't heard anybody say this is the best one. Almost everybody will agree this is the worst, and that's why there's not a lot of confidence that yet another one, a fifth one, will do better, because we've seen this type of thing before, for example, with the Terminator franchise, which I will get into at some point. So I agree with that. It's the worst of them, but I disagree that it killed the franchise. It didn't kill the franchise. It might have been one small piece of killing Shia LaBeouf's career, that the parts that he didn't kill outright off screen. Now I know I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong, but I don't know. I've never been properly pronouncing Shia's name or Shia's name, so don't expect me to do it now. I just have a speech problem with his name, or a mental problem. Who knows? 2.5 stars. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull successfully transitions the Indiana Jones franchise to the 21st century with better visual effects. Is that really a good thing, though? The less polished nature of the original trilogy is part of its charm. Also, the violence in this film is also very mild compared to previous installments, but depending on who you ask, that could either be a good or a bad thing. For me, it's a bad thing. There are also a lot of aspects of the film that are very far-fetched, such as characters randomly gaining, maybe they're trailing off into what I mentioned before, characters kind of randomly gain abilities that they need at the right time, like Shia LaBeouf's character having this acrobatic ability to swing through trees all of a sudden. Last time I checked, he wasn't trained as an acrobat. That didn't come up earlier in the story. It also didn't come up earlier in the story that he was skilled at sword combat. So, yeah, these things just kind of pop up, that they have these abilities with no prior explanation of how that happened. And again, that brings me into the whole idea that Shia LaBeouf's character was going to take over for the older Indiana Jones. He was going to replace him. The rumor was he was going to carry on the franchise. But putting the actor's abilities aside completely, even if he had been a great actor and had fit perfectly in Indiana Jones, people, if the title says Indiana Jones, they want Harrison Ford. They want Indiana Jones. He is Harrison Ford. Anybody you slap in there to try to play him even somebody of the same age, somebody that even looks like him, it's not going to work. Indiana Jones only worked because of Harrison Ford. It's like, it reminds me of Disney replacing the character of Han Solo with a younger actor, and despite the younger actor actually having some charm, it just doesn't work, and nobody expected it to. 2.5 stars. It's solid, but Harrison Ford has sadly aged out of the Indy role. I agree somewhat, but if they had used that to their advantage in the script, it could have worked. He's certainly not elderly and feeble. He can act. He can do dramatic roles. He can do some action. You don't have to have him swinging from vines over giant chasms and trading blows with 20-year-olds in fistfights. You could have transitioned into his age better. Again, replacing him with a younger one wouldn't work. I just think that the age isn't the thing. It's just the execution. It's his performance. It's like his heart wasn't in it, and that's not really age. Look at Sean Connery's age in any movie he's in. As he's gotten older, he doesn't suddenly forget how to act. He enjoys acting, obviously, and he puts his heart into his roles, and it doesn't matter. He's old. He's gotten better with age. So I don't agree that the age is the problem. Here's a 3-star review. It was okay, the least of the Indy films, but entertaining despite its flaws and silliness, which is no less silly than what's in the previous sequels. Example, raft falling out of a plane, 400-year-old knight speaking modern English, etc. Okay, the 50s setting was fun. Yes, I agree. People saying that it's crazy that, for example, they bring up the scene with the refrigerator at the test site in Nevada where Indiana Jones survives the nuclear blast or the shockwave of it by putting himself in an old 1950s refrigerator. That is not out of character with Indiana Jones. It's not any more unrealistic than the raft falling out of the plane in Temple of Doom, or exactly the 400-plus-year-old knight speaking perfect English in The Last Crusade. And there are other examples. Even at the time, for example, in The Last Crusade, that scene with the knight struck me as weird, that he would speak English perfectly. But the rest of the movie was enjoyable enough that I could hand wave that away, even though it did pop up in my mind at the time. The same with the raft in the Temple of Doom. It popped up immediately. Hey, wait a second. You don't just land at that altitude in a raft and slide away, walk away. You're going away in thimble-sized pieces. But that's part of Indiana Jones, and it wasn't a problem in Raiders of the Lost Ark or Temple of Doom, or the one was the Last Crusade. So why is it suddenly a problem in this one? I don't think so. It's nitpicking, and I think it's more the bad CGI and some of the bad writing on the dialogue, and the fact that Harrison Ford's heart wasn't in it that's more leading to these nitpicks. 3 stars, I don't agree. I would knock it down to 2 or 2.5. If it were 3 stars, I probably wouldn't be. If I agreed it was a 3-star movie, I wouldn't be doing this rotten review on it. There's no chance of that. Half a star. Arg, no, make it stop. This movie is so bad it doesn't even work as a B movie people watch ironically. It makes me sad to see legends like Harrison Ford, Cate Blanchett, Karen Allen, John Hurt in a film with such terrible writing. I prefer to pretend this movie never happened again. I agree with the writing, B-movie type writing, particularly where the pacing changed up. It took a long time just to get us to, the part where you would find out what the mystery of the Crystal Skull was. And when we did get there, it rushed through it so fast and everything happened so fast that the part, especially like when you had the natives, the Peruvian natives popping out of ancient hiding holes inside the ruins, you have to ask yourself, how did they get in there? How long were they waiting in there? And were they like sealed in stasis chambers to be awakened after Indiana Jones pushed some stone button on the floor? I mean, a lot of stuff like that didn't make sense and was rushed into it. And the pacing, We took a long time just to get to that vehicle chase. You know, the one I said has bad CGI. We took a long time to get there. And then all of a sudden, at the point where we reached the ancient ruins with the crystal skull, we just rushed through that super fast, and all of a sudden we're dealing with an alien or a group of aliens transforming into one alien, and the UFO taking off, and boom, that's it. And the pacing in that is really off. The other B movie aspect of this is the dialogue, like it's mentioned here, the writing of the dialogue, the lines. There were lines that were that should have been funny, but they just weren't done right, and they were kind of on the edge of being funny, but they didn't land right. You know, in the first movie, um, there were a lot of lines that were funny. There were a bunch that were just improvs by Harrison Ford and others that they just kept in. They just had the chemistry to improv some of it. They went off script, and it came out perfect, and it got the laughs. But you don't see that in this film. If they were allowed to improv, it didn't work at all. And if this was totally scripted, the writing, it was subpar. 2 stars. This movie is offensive to the previous three. I agree on the 2 stars. I don't think it's offensive to the previous three. I think it's disappointing. It shows that Lucas and maybe even Harrison Ford himself, their hearts weren't in this. I'm not sure why they did this if they weren't passionate about it. 2.5 stars. Very similar premise, but felt lacking in chemistry between Harrison Ford and Shia LaBeouf. It just didn't do much to wow me. I agree. There wasn't chemistry between Ford and his quasi-son. Um, there were some cracks about, you know, calling Indian old man and etc. The 1950s slang was played up a little too much with Shia LaBeouf. Like, it was comically played up a little too much. It didn't come out as funny. It didn't come out as serious. It was just a little cringy. Um, 5 stars on this review. Loved this movie. Absolutely amazing. Don't know why people hate it. It was great to see Indiana Jones take a new direction and step away from supernatural and religious artifacts and into the realm of paranormal. The villains were awesome, and the fight scene with the ants is the best fight scene in the whole series. The locations were cool, and I loved how instead of taking place in the deserts of Africa or the Middle East, Indy finally has an entire adventure in the jungle. This was such a fun movie. I disagree. Of course, I disagree on the 5 stars. I agree that the ant scene was original, and it was an addition to the Indiana Jones series, but the tension was missing. I don't know whether it's because we know that somehow Indiana Jones has to survive this and the good guys will win. That could be part of it, but there was a lack of tension in all of this. The ant scene should have had tension, and if it had, it would have been more thrilling, but it just didn't have it. And, you know, I'm not completely blaming Lucas or the writers, because this might have worked back in the early 80s, but as movie number 4, and with audience expectations higher, the tension, it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to consider the ant hill scene exciting. Um, for me, it's all about tension. It needed more. Now, again, they say the reviews are saying a previous review mentioned that it didn't feel like it had the physical danger, or I don't remember the exact word they used, but it didn't have the tension that the earlier movies did. And, you know, some of that is you can't do the type of edgy humor that you probably could have in 1980. That's a given. If you watch the first Raiders, you'll see that there are some humorous moments that are cutting the edge of what would be considered taboo today in the theater, especially for something that's PG. Um, so I don't know. I'm not completely blaming the writers or Lucas on that. It might be partly audience expectations, but there was definitely a lack of tension, particularly in that ant scene. And again, in the vehicle chase scene in the jungle, a lack of tension. Despite the bad CGI, it just didn't come across as, you know, I'm really afraid that they're going to fail, or I'm afraid that somebody's actually going to take a, you know, some kind of fatal hit here. It was a little bit, it was like a comic book, like an old comic book, like it's supposed to be, but old comic books had tension. I mean, you even old serials that were shown in movie theaters before movies, when you had double feature movies and you had your little short serial cliffhanger that would be like Buck Rogers or something like Indiana Jones. Um, there was still tension. There was still tension and climaxes, and you just don't have that in this movie. It feels flat. Half a star. John Hurt and Ray Winstone combined could not equal the missing Denholm Elliott. The characters and acting of these two were just pointless and ruined a five-star story. I agree on that. Denholm Elliott, the actor, I don't know much about his career, but I know he really did make the first Raiders. He showed up in the movie, and he wasn't a major. He didn't seem like a major character. I mean, when you watch the film, he had very short amounts of screen time, but he was there in a way to play against the character of Indiana Jones, to show him as a professor, to show him what he's like when he's not out doing these adventurous things. And without him, there's something missing. There's a contrast there that's missing that kind of causes uh, Harrison Ford's character to fall a little flat, I think, without him. So I agree with that. 1.5 stars. Aliens, really? Again, that's really off-putting for people, but I don't think that was the issue. I think it was how it was done. 3 stars. The one and only adventurer returns to the big screen to bring back entertainment to the audience, shockingly, along with loaded CGI, some dull dialogue, and a weak storyline. I agree. Completely, except for the 3 stars. I don't think it quite deserves 3 stars. And loaded CGI, yeah, CGI that was too obvious. Weak dialogue, weak storyline. I agree. I agree with that. Missed opportunities. 1.5 stars. This movie is a whole new turn in the franchise, and I don't like to do with aliens and stuff like that. It just doesn't feel like an Indiana Jones movie anymore. I like the old Indiana Jones movies, but this one just doesn't feel right. I mostly agree. 5 stars. I love Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. It was a perfect Indiana Jones adventure. Everything was great. I hope we can see Harrison Ford again in Indiana Jones 5. I don't like reboots. Yeah, it wasn't a reboot. I wouldn't give it 5 stars, and this seems to come from somebody that's just very forgiving with the franchise. I'm a little pickier. So anyway, the next review, 5 stars. Indiana Jones, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is so dense with action, story, and humor that it cured my depression. It's really good, guys. I would say no, and that review seems a little contrived to me, at least. 2 stars. Sorry to feel my childhood so far away. Yeah, in a way. It can be disappointing. It's hard if, like Star Wars fans, it's really hard if you are into it and you see where it's gone. It can be depressing. 3 stars. The film bored me to death towards the middle, but thanks to Ford's return to the role and Shia LaBeouf's performance, makes Indy's fourth adventure worth my time. I completely disagree. Shia LaBeouf's performance was unnecessary. It wasn't bad, but it just didn't fit with the Indiana Jones vibe. His chemistry didn't come across with Harrison Ford. So no, I disagree. A mediocre movie. Shia LaBeouf is as bad as almost every new character, but have his moments. Like Han Solo would say, like the first scene. Shia LaBeouf is bad. I don't think he's actually bad in this. It just doesn't work. It just doesn't work with Indiana Jones. 3.5 stars. At some points, a bit silly with twists and turns, and at times a bit rushed. Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull offers up an exciting adventure and some excellent action scenes, despite not being as thrilling as previous installments. Again, a little too forgiving for my taste, so I'm not going to agree. 4.5 stars. Or no, this is 3.5 stars. Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is an adventure film, obviously. The movie is about an alien skeleton skull from a temple that was lost. Knowing that, Indiana and the Nazis enter a race to see who finds it first. The main character is Indiana Jones, interpreted by Harrison Ford. This is a pretty weird review. It's not a review, it's like a summation that a little kid would do. Probably, like this is English as a second language. No offense to the poster, but it's not really a review. And it's incorrect. There are no Nazis here. It's about the Russians, the Soviets. That would have worked perfectly for a 50s film. Um, I think that there is one interesting part of this. Indiana Jones interpreted by Harrison Ford. I think that's completely the wrong way of looking at it. As I said before, Indiana Jones is Harrison Ford. It's not like you can take Indiana Jones and replace him with, I don't know, pick any other actor, and it's still Indiana Jones. It isn't. So saying this is an interpretation of Indiana Jones could actually be an insult to Harrison Ford, but since this is a 3.5-star review, I don't consider this an insult. They just don't understand what they're talking about. And that would be an insult to say, this movie was Indiana Jones interpreted by Harrison Ford. That's kind of almost subversive in a way. But I don't see subversion in this movie. I just see lackluster, lack of passion. 3 stars. The 4th installment of Indiana Jones that has biggest divisive fault of its beloved fans alike, with its nuke the fridge, which infamously beginning of CGI extravaganza on the film itself, misplacement of fan service moments, implementation of science fiction that alienated the franchise itself. The characterization of each character are good enough, even it has its flaws. In my mind, I am still enjoying this 4th Indiana Jones film, just like its trio predecessors, and even it is well received by critics alike. Well, certainly that is one thing about the Rotten Tomato reviews. The professional critics liked it overall. They gave it better than a B. So I think just their level of nitpickiness with the franchise is just less than average. They give it passes where maybe it shouldn't be given passes. Now, as far as the nuke the fridge, I brought that up. People complain about that, but again, this is Indiana Jones, a comic book type character. It's meant to be like that, and Nuke the Fridge is no more unrealistic than the stuff you saw in Temple of Doom or The Last Crusade. And there are moments, well, for example, there's a really jarring for me moment in the original Raiders that doesn't ruin the movie for me, but it's very jarring, in which Indiana Jones, swims out to the Nazi submarine and climbs on top of it, and he's looking around as though he's trying to figure out a way inside. But as we know, you don't just climb on the outside of a World War II German submarine and open the hatch and climb inside without either A, you're not going to get in, or B, as soon as you do, they're going to be all over you. And I find it hard to believe you would even be able to open it from the outside. So in the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, you have it cutting immediately from that to the scene in which the sub shows up at the Nazi island base, and there is Harrison Ford, not shown on top of the submarine, but shown as he's already climbed off the submarine and he's hiding behind some barrels. Now, how did that happen? It kind of leaves it up to your mind. I guess Lucas and Spielberg knew there was a problem there, so they just edited it so that when you watch the movie, you didn't think about it too much, at least not on the first viewing. But after several viewings, even as a 12-year-old, I had questions like, how does that happen exactly? Now, again, there were moments like that, and we expected that from Indiana Jones. So this nuke the fridge thing, it's not out of line. In fact, it's pretty inventive. I think that if you got inside that old 1950s refrigerator and you were far enough from the actual blast, the actual scene of the blast, you were far enough away that when the shockwave hit it, that you could somehow stay inside the refrigerator. I'm not saying it would protect you against the initial radiation, but it is doable. It is doable. I mean, Do we know the yield in kilotons of that blast? No. Do we know if that town, that cardboard town there that was at the test site was at ground zero? Most of them weren't. They were quite a ways from ground zero. That was the point of it. So this is not out of line in Indiana Jones or even in another standalone movie. It's comical, sure, but it's not completely out of line, not in my way of thinking. We can find much worse in the better movies. 3 stars. I'm hoping that the next installment to this franchise won't involve a flying saucer. I second that because they already screwed it up with the aliens, and doing aliens again would tank this baby hard. I mean, I would jump off at that point. I definitely wouldn't pay money to see it. I think that they need to go back to the original type of story and forget about the flying saucer thing. Maybe pay it some lip service just to explain how that got smoothed over at the end, but very brief. Don't go into that. Make a joking reference to it, maybe make fun of itself, but yeah, oh please no. If more alien stuff shows up, or even if they try to make it a straight up continuation somehow of the other one, oh wow, I won't waste my time. I'll just wait for the train wreck and do a crazy rotten review of it or something even better. It'll be a dumpster fire at that point. 4 stars. There are 1-2 things to complain about this movie that stick out. The graphics in some scenes and the aliens. I agree with that. You can definitely tell the green screen during the jungle sword fight. I agree with that. But I would have to complain the most about the aliens. That was so stupid about the aliens. Other than that, this movie is good since Indiana Jones is an iconic character and it delivered. I loved how they brought back his love interest from the first movie. Hopefully Indiana Jones will be better. I agree with a lot of this. I don't agree with the rating, the 4 stars. I do agree it was good to bring Karen Allen back. I think she was underused. There wasn't enough chemistry there. They didn't deliver the emotion that should have had. It fell flat. I think that was awesome, though, that they did that they could get her to come back. That was one of the best parts about it. Again, I agree. I agree. I already mentioned it. The jungle scene, the green screen look to it during the sword fighting, and particularly when Shia LaBeouf's character swung through the trees. Yeah, that was bad. So I agree, except for the stars. 5 stars on this one. Don't let the hate for it fool you. It's just as good as its predecessors. A fun, exciting, refreshing, visually dazzling sci-fi fantasy action adventure, and the perfect return to the franchise. I disagree with the stars. I disagree with the review. I would not characterize the Indiana Jones franchise, if you will, as sci-fi fantasy action adventure. Action adventure. Fantasy action adventure, 100%. Sci-fi, no, it never was, and that's the jarring part. They could have done the alien element without making it sci-fi, and that's really what I was saying. Just because something has aliens doesn't make it sci-fi. It's the way you do it. You can have a horror movie have an alien that's not sci-fi. An alien can be played mythologically. It can be a mythological, even a religious experience. It doesn't have to be sci-fi. It's not supposed to be sci-fi. There were better ways to do the alien angle that they could have still had it revealed as being an alien. 2 stars. The weakest in Indiana Saga, I agree. 2 stars. This movie hasn't aged well, and fans still wish it didn't exist. A lot of fans wish it didn't exist. It does. It's not nearly as bad as what's gone on with Star Wars. Again, I don't like making comparisons, but Star Wars comparisons seem to be the rule of the day, particularly on YouTube. It's the sign of the times we live in. So I'd say that the fans being pissed off about this episode of Indiana Jones is not nearly as bad as what's been done to Star Wars, and it's not as bad as what's been done to the Terminator franchise. So I say Indiana Jones it's still alive. It still has a shot of coming back into its popularity. I just don't think we're going to see that, but it can still be done. If Lucas had his heart in it, and if he would get Spielberg on board, not just in name, if he would get somebody else on board, to actually rein him in, to shore up his weak parts, then this could be awesome. I personally, I doubt that's going to happen. 4.5 stars, all in all, a good movie, very funny. I would say no, it wasn't very funny. There were some moments, but not what we were expecting. It was a serious letdown, even in the humor department. 5 stars, it was very entertaining. No, and I would say the only action sequence, ironically, that did work for me was the motorcycle chase towards the beginning of the movie through the college and whatnot. That was actually well done. But unfortunately, that's not enough for an Indiana Jones movie. It should have gotten better from there. 2.5 stars, a thorough disappointment, but not a disaster. First third is actually quite good, then it goes downhill fast. Main problems are the moronic plot and the overuse of CGI. I expected more from Spielberg, Lucas, and Harrison Ford. A fourth part nobody really needed. I agree with a lot of this, but I also don't consider it a complete disaster. But I think we should differentiate when we say Spielberg, Lucas, and Harrison Ford. From what I've read, Spielberg wasn't actually that hands-on with this movie. His name is on it, but I remember reading that no, this was all Lucas. Spielberg did what Lucas said. Spielberg wasn't really the guy there doing all this, but his name was attached to it. 0.5 star. In an era that seems determined to murder every successful and beloved franchise, Terminator, Alien, Predator, Star Wars, Star Trek, Ghostbusters, and so many more, we get this pile of turd. Indiana is back, but only in body, in a movie that just wants you to know how old Harrison Ford is, because that is the one joke throughout. It is boring, thoughtless, and ridiculous, more like a piss take than a sequel. Then, with a franchise centered around biblical artifacts, throws in an alien. I agree with a lot of that. We're living in an era where corporate Hollywood is just, I don't know, they say it's because they're afraid to take risks. I think it's just easy money. It's low-hanging fruit to just milk every popular movie or two from the past into a franchise, turn things into franchises that weren't. And there are just enough people, particularly overseas and in China, that will throw just enough money at this way of doing business to keep it going, and we're suffering. I think originality is like it's too risky now. The politics involved. So, they're trying to go back to sure tried formulas, but the problem is they're bringing back movies like Indiana Jones that were done differently in the past and with different people on board. And they're trying to do it, but they're doing it half-ass, and they're using new technology, thinking the new technology, the CGI, for example, will make up for the less than stellar artistic freedom that they're enjoying. The CGI is not a cure for anything. In fact, it takes away the realism from things that were made with practical effects. Um, so anyway, I think that when they say that the franchise was centered around biblical artifacts, that's true. Almost every single artifact shown in the previous Indiana Jones movies is biblical in nature, with some exceptions in the Temple of Doom. Um, but throwing the alien in, it could have been done right. If that were put in a biblical sense, if the alien material were seen from a biblical angle, from an ancient religious angle, it could have worked. Again, it was the execution. It didn't have to be as jarring as it was and as rushed as it was. 3 stars. I didn't mind this movie, but yes, I can understand as to why the fans didn't really like this movie. I somewhat enjoyed it. I liked Act 1 more than Act 2. So in conclusion, it's not the worst reboot ever. I've seen a few of these reviews now, and I largely agree. The first act of the movie was the best. It was getting more interesting. The tension was building. Again, the motorcycle chase. You brought in Shia LaBeouf's character. There was still a lot of promise with that at the beginning. Then all of a sudden, it started meandering, and then it just kind of bombed out at the very end. The tension dropped instead of rising. And at the beginning, it was on an upward trajectory, and I was like, hey, I can get into this. And then it just kind of meandered, flatlined, and then went down at the end. So I agree, but I don't agree on the 3 stars. I think 2.5. 2.5 is proper. 2 stars. A mess of a movie, compounded by the fact that this is an Indiana Jones movie. All the twists happen in the first 15 minutes, and there's really nowhere to go other than unbelievable and over-the-top action sequences. Aliens can work, but they didn't work here. Agree. That's what I'm saying. Was it twists? Maybe. I think it was new stuff thrown in that worked at the beginning, but then it fell flat. I agree with this review. 2 stars. While some aspects of the movie could have been better, honestly, Aliens and Indiana Jones, why did they do that? The overall originality and creativity of the Indiana Jones series have not been completely lost. I agree. It's not finished. It's not dead. It's just we need to move on. This is could be a speed bump. It doesn't have to be the end of the franchise. It doesn't have to mean the next one is doomed. We're not into we're not far enough down the doomed road as say the Terminator franchise is. That's doomed. This is not doomed yet. 3.5 stars. This movie has been strongly criticized and, of course, is not as good as the classic Indiana Jones films. However, the story is interesting, the atmosphere is very Indiana Jones, and the cast is funny. Do not expect a masterpiece, but I think it is okay if you like the adventure of the most famous archaeologist in the world. So this review, they're saying give it a pass because it's Indiana Jones. I don't agree. We have to judge it not only based on the other Indiana Jones material, but you have to judge it as this was done by George Lucas. His name's on it, and believe it or not, Steven Spielberg's name's on it. I know he wasn't hands-on with it, but his name's on it. You would think you would want your name attached to things that you really had a hand in creating, but I don't know. That's an argument that'll take us around forever. 3.5 stars. Even though this is the weakest of the Indiana Jones films, it's not really as bad as everyone says. The hate it gets is exaggerated in my opinion, but anyway, I liked it. It had all the elements that made up an Indiana Jones movie. I personally don't really have that much of a problem with Aliens. Again, the weakest Indiana Jones movie, but not a bad movie overall. Yeah, I'd say the hate's exaggerated, but I would take back a couple of those stars. 1 star, absolutely not an Indiana Jones movie. I've seen them all and how much they decided to stray. Just surprised they didn't turn it into some bastardized musical. Um, He's got a point there. It could have become a musical. After all, it had Shia LaBeouf. It could have been a lot of weird things. Thankfully, Lucas didn't go too crazy. He didn't do a Phantom Menace treatment with it. So it wasn't a total disaster. 3 stars. It's an Indiana Jones movie, but it just doesn't stick like the others. I agree. Take that back to 2 stars. 1.5 stars. It doesn't stick. It is forgettable aside from a few scenes. The motorcycle scene to me is not forgettable. The anthill scene's not quite forgettable, but again, the execution, it was lackluster. There was no passion. 5 stars. I can watch this movie again and again using Boxy software. Great scenario and actors. I don't know what Boxy software is, but I don't think I would employ special software to keep watching this. I would rather look forward to a movie that might be better. 3.5 stars. I actually did enjoy this. It's ridiculous, yes, but I still found enjoyment out of it. Okay, I agree, but not with the stars. 3 stars. After 19 years of waiting, many gathered to the theater to watch the fourth Indiana Jones movie and realized how disappointing it was. The first half of this movie was good, besides being somewhat boring and nuking the fridge. Then there were aliens, and now I am questioning reality. I like the wording. 19 years of waiting. Well, if you just saw the first one and sat out all the others, but where were you the whole time? So I don't get it on that one. 2 stars. An okay indie movie screws up in certain other elements. 1/2 star. I've put off watching this long enough. I made it 10 minutes before I lost my lunch and interest. I almost got halfway through. This is nostalgic puke, nothing more. I can see where you're coming from. 1 star. South Park was right. They raped the poor Indiana Jones. That's a strong word. I don't think I would use that word because, again, I think a lot of it falls on Harrison Ford. He didn't have the passion. Um, he was allowed by Lucas to improvise in the first Raiders and perhaps in the others. So why didn't he hear? And if he did, he didn't seem to have his heart in it. And his delivery of lines, particularly, there are some people have pointed out some lines between him and Shia LaBeouf that it almost seems like Harrison Ford is just reading his script off a page, practicing, and he's completely disinterested. So yeah, you can't use that R word unless he did it to himself. 1 star. Not a big Indiana Jones fan, and this was the worst. 3.5 stars. It can be difficult to make another chapter in a popular series after a long time. With lighting, color correcting, and SFX in its modern time, it may look better, but doesn't really feel the same. Now, I disagree, it doesn't look better. The original Raiders looks better. Flat out, it looks better in almost every aspect except for the CGI in the very last scene, in which, in particular, you had the melting faces, the melting skulls. Now that's a lot worse. That's cringy by today's standards. But in every other regard, the fight scenes, the scenes in the desert, even them just digging open the pyramid, that looks better than what was presented in the newest movie. Only the melting of the skulls. Now, if you go back and watch Raiders, you'll have no problem with it until the melting of the skulls, and then you have to say, okay, yes, this is a 1980 movie, a 1981 movie, so that's what they had to work with. But if you were to if you were to give it the Lucas treatment, if you were to go back and say, just go in and tweak some of the stuff like the melting skulls, it would still be a passable movie today. Now, of course, I wouldn't trust Lucas to do that. If he did have the ability to do that, who knows? He might go hog wild like he did on Star Wars and just start doing all kinds of crazy stuff. So I'd rather him not do that. But no, I disagree. Raiders looked better. It was more realistic. The atmosphere was better. It was grittier. It was sweatier. It was hotter. When you were in a hot, gritty, sweaty place, it felt like you were. There was nothing, when you were in the jungle in Peru, for example, the newest movie, you're in the jungle in Peru. We know it's hot and sweaty there. I can guarantee you that it is. And yet you didn't get that sense of it when you saw them trudging through the jungle, fighting in the jungle, going into the temple. You didn't get the sense of that atmosphere at all. It was completely sterile. So that's a big problem. 5 stars. I really liked it, not the originals, though. Okay, but then, wait a second now. Let me do a double take. 5 stars. I really liked it, not the originals, though. Okay, so you've never seen the originals, or you have and you didn't like them, and then you saw this movie and all of a sudden liked it. That's rare. If that's real, it's very rare. And somebody should actually do some market research, find these people, and maybe they can use them for the next Star Wars movie. You can use these people in your promotions because this is very rare. This is like finding that unicorn out there amongst the herd, because wow, that's all reversed around. So I can't even say that I disagree with the 5 stars, because if you're saying that this movie was awesome and all the others sucked, for whatever reason, I'd like to hear your reasons, but I don't have them here. If you're sincere about that, then go ahead and put 5 stars, but I'd really wish you would have elaborated on why that is. I'd like to go over that. I really would. 3 stars. Even if they nuked the fridge with this one, it was still okay. Again, nuke the fridge, that's like a meme. It's a catchy meme. I like it. But it's not out of line. It's not out of line. It's Indiana Jones. 4 stars. Good film overall. Great to see Indian action again. Okay, maybe, but you're very forgiving, and I'm not. 4.5 stars. Love this installment. 4 stars. Very entertaining movie and a worthy Indiana Jones entry. 5 stars. The writing continues to be fantastic, even though the plot and storyline are not as original as the original 3. The costume designs were amazing, and I loved the scenery sets, especially the use of the 1950s. I thought the action fight scenes were very well done. The musical score was fantastic. All of the visual sound effects were done very nicely, and even though there was some overuse of visual effects, I especially loved how spectacular the acting performances were, specifically Harrison Ford. I completely disagree. I mean, you almost had me with your eloquent praise for it because it sounded sincere. But then when you got to the acting performance of Harrison Ford, that's where he lost me because he wasn't trying. He wasn't trying. I mean, a sick Harrison Ford, literally sick on the set of the first Raiders movie, came off as being into his role. He did a good job. And you can read up on this. A lot of the cast were very sick during the movie when it was filming because it was filmed where pretty much where it was set in the desert. Um, so no way you lost me there. Harrison Ford on his worst day has put in better performances. Great movie, 4.5 stars. I love seeing Indy back in action. Well, if you just see him, if that's what your criteria are, then you can have your 4.5 stars. You should have done 5 because it was all Indiana Jones. 4 stars. I really like and enjoy this installment. 3 stars. Looks weird at times. Could be, but CGI could be better. Still watchable. Yeah, CGI was a major drawback. On the first viewing, mind you. On repeated viewings, it's really bad. 3.5 stars. This film has some good moments to it, but very disappointing. But you gave it 3.5 stars? You're very forgiving. Walk it back a little if it's very disappointing, right? 4 stars. Recently rewatched this film and really enjoyed it. Harrison Ford is great as Indy and love the alien storyline. It really fits for the time period in which the film takes place. Definitely a worthy installment in the series. Okay, I disagree largely on the rating that you've given, but I do agree that the alien storyline does fit into the time period. It just wasn't done right, that's all. 4 stars. Great entry in the Indiana Jones series. Entertaining and really enjoyed the story. Great to see Harrison Ford and Karen Allen back in the iconic roles. Yes, I agree. It was great to have them back together. It was just not done right. It wasn't written well enough. I disagree otherwise. 2 stars. The worst Indiana Jones movie by far. Unfortunately, visionary director Steven Spielberg returned to his beloved action franchise Indiana Jones to middling results. Okay, just an aside here. It's not actually Steven Spielberg's franchise. His name is attached, but he's not the one that was calling the shots. It was George Lucas, but let's continue. Um, it is not a terrible movie. It is thoroughly mediocre in every way. Missed opportunities, wasted cast, lazy direction, endless callbacks, ridiculous danger, and contrived plot all lead this film to failure. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull has some neat close-ups, panning shots, set designs. Okay, 2 stars overall. I agree. I would give it the 2 stars. But don't pin it on Spielberg, really. No, he had his name on it, but it wasn't his decision to do all these things. Not from what I've read. 2.5 stars. Why didn't they stop after the first trilogy? These movies were so good. This movie, on the other hand, is an embarrassment to the saga. Well, why didn't they stop? It's like, why didn't they stop after Terminator 2? Why do they keep making Terminator movies and having James Cameron come out and endorse it or put his name on it in some aspect, but not actually have any hand in it? It's because they're looking for a way to make a movie that'll generate profit, especially overseas in China, but they don't want to take a risk. They're risk averse, as they say, and they're not done just strip mining the 80s. They're just not done with it yet. Comic books are such a gold mine. There's still so much to strip out there from the 80s too. And, every time a comic book movie comes out, like even every time an MCU movie came out and made $1 billion, it encouraged people to do the same with Indiana Jones, etc. So that's why. You can't blame China entirely because plenty of Americans are putting their money on this. But, I don't think they're done. I don't think they're done yet. There's still a lot to strip mine from the 80s. 0.5 star. I did not like Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. That one was a horrible movie. There was a lot of moments in it where you will be like, what? I was not impressed with that one. I thought Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was unnecessarily in the entire Indiana Jones franchise. The CGI effects in the film looked terrible. I do not like it as much as the classic movie trilogy. I do not like Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I agree. Um, I don't disagree with anything there, but I wouldn't give it half a star. I'd say 2.5 stars because um, I watched the whole thing. Now, if I had shut it off after 20 minutes or actually fallen asleep, then I would have put it down to a star or less. But no, I watched the whole thing, so I'm not going to go below 2.5 stars. 1 star. I do like action movies, however, this one just did not appeal to me. Half a star, horrid. I only made it through the first 15 minutes before I had to turn it off. Including gruesome violence, it was clearly not made for children, but I can't imagine anyone but a small child being amused by the slapstick comedy effort. This movie is abysmal. I didn't find any gruesome violence in it, not compared to previous Indiana Jones movies. But again, I found this also in Star Wars. He seems to have a problem now where he's a little schizophrenic in who making the action violence for. On one hand, um, he wants to appeal to kids, but on the other hand, he wants to appeal to adults, and he's just not good at pulling that off. And that also makes it very difficult to market the movie because in your marketing, you can do it one way or the other, but then a lot of your audience is going to be pissed off from the get-go once they get 5 minutes into it. So, he's just made a lot of bad marketing decisions like that. In my opinion, Indiana Jones was more for teenagers and adults. It was never for little kids, but little kids could watch it. I mean, it wasn't R-rated. Temple of Doom was really pushing the line just for the gross out factor. But no, I don't think this new one, if anything, this new one's sanitized. 2 stars. It was a dumb movie. Who the hell thought of the whole aliens in Peru crap? The storyline was the worst of the Indiana Jones movies. I liked the other original ones better. I agree. The aliens crap, it should have been done so much better. 1 star. Never understood the hate. I think it's entertaining as it's supposed to be. No, hate's too much, but it's not entertaining like it's supposed to be. That's the problem. 3 stars. This film is just, well, it's pretty eh. Yeah, well, that's lower than 3 stars. 2.5 stars. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is an entertaining but disappointing fourth installment. 2.5 stars. Okay, okay. 1 star. One of the worst movies I've ever seen. The characters are dull and boring. The story is paper thin, and the villain is just the worst character by far. I give it 1 star. Yeah, I could see if you weren't a complete fan, yeah, that it's complete crap. But no, it's still pretty much an Indiana Jones movie to me, so it's better than 1 star. 3.5 stars. Good film. Indiana Jones actually matters in this one. 4/21/18. I guess that's a reference on when he saw it. I disagree. I'm way more critical than that, and I think I'm fair. 4.5 stars. If you ignore the bad CGI and some of the cheesy moments, you'll find that this movie is actually spectacular fun. This movie is way overhated. I mean, come on, there is a reason it has a 77% on Rotten Tomatoes. Don't go by that. Star Wars is a 92%, and yeah, we've gotten into that before. So if you want to bring up an audience score and tell me it has a 77%, then I'm all with you. But critic score, really? No, 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 no. You're not going to get me with that one. George Lucas and Steven Spielberg team up to make a movie with so much nostalgia and also brings new things to the table. Sure, it does have some bad moments, the monkey scene, but it's actually pretty good. If you're referring to when Shia LaBeouf like turns into one of the monkeys, yeah, it's pretty damn bad. It's cringeworthy. Otherwise, I completely disagree with your review. 1.5 stars. Took me 10 years to finally see this movie. I can sum it up like this. The good, Harrison Ford and Karen Allen. The bad, Shia LaBeouf and Cate Blanchett. The ugly, terrible CGI and too much green screen action with obvious digital backgrounds. Verdict, would never watch again. Now I agree with this. I agree with this. Took me 10 years to finally see it. Well, probably because the marketing alone didn't really do it for you, and neither did the word of mouth. And, I've noticed that a lot because we're in the internet age. Um, Even if you're into something and you were a fan of the previous movies in that something, when a movie isn't quite up to par, you may not know it consciously, but you kind of see it in the buzz in what you read online, even if you're not looking for it, even if you're busy doing other things, and you just find yourself not seeing it, and then years later you run across it on cable or on Netflix. And I found that a lot. Every time that happened to me with a movie I had ordinarily would have made it a point to see at some point, I find out years later that sure enough, it wasn't that great. It disappointed me. And somehow I had known. I had known from the trailer, or I had known from some kind of bad buzz out there, even though I hadn't consciously thought to myself, well, this movie looks like crap. I just kind of forgot about it until running across it later. And I think that's the same with a lot of people. Um, you don't know why it's just off-putting to you. You can see a trailer for a movie, and you can say, well, that's interesting, and then 10 minutes later you're back doing something else and have completely forgotten about it. And I guess that's either failed marketing, or it's your subtle unconscious mind telling you that I think I have enough clues here that this movie is going to be crap, so you shouldn't waste your time. I think that's a thing. And not being a psychology major, I wouldn't know how to go into it any further than that. But I've noticed that a lot. I noticed that a lot. I trust my instinct, so to speak. 2.5 stars. It's lost its sparkle. Just not up to the task of keeping me bothered about Dr. Jones anymore. Very lackluster. And they call him Dr. Jones in this review, and that reminds me of something else I wanted to say. As you go through the movies, you watch them. Every movie since Raiders of the Lost Ark has gotten further and further away from the aspect of Indiana Jones' character being a doctor, that he's actually an archaeologist. It goes further and further away from that. And yeah, you're reminded suddenly here in subtle ways here and there that he's actually an archaeologist, but by and large, no. The first movie actually gives you scenes that, hey, this guy's an archaeologist at college. It even goes into, girls have a crush on him. It puts some background in there. And then every movie after that, even in Temple of Doom, he's called Dr. Jones, Dr. Jones. Every movie after that, and the more so in this last one, they've got him as this action adventure hero, but they completely sideline the fact that he was a doctor or an archaeologist, that he had a PhD, that he was a scholar. And they kind of go away from that completely. Now, in this latest movie, they go into a new aspect that, okay, he was working actually for American intelligence at some point during World War II. Now, that was never touched into at all in the first movie. That took place, right into World War II. But it brought a new angle that I kind of liked. But again, it kind of did it in a half-assed way. It just like mentioned it and had him meeting with Army intelligence, but it didn't take advantage of it, and it completely took away the aspect of him being an archaeologist. And that was the most fascinating thing in the first movie, that this was an archaeologist, and yet his side gig was to go have all these adventures. That's what made him different. And that's been completely lost through the movies, completely lost. 4.5 stars. Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull has a similar plot line to the previous films in the franchise, but it still gives the audience the adventure and thrills that we've been waiting for since the third film. Harrison Ford's return in the title role is more than welcome to everyone, and he still gives the type of performance we all love. No, see, I disagree. He doesn't. He phones it in. He's not even trying, and that's the problem. I'm going to move on. 0.5 star. The all-time dumbest movie I have ever seen after Into the Woods. I'll have to take your words on Into the Woods. Haven't seen it. I'm not even sure what type of movie that is. But dumbest movie I've ever seen. It could be, especially if you're not into Indiana Jones. You're not a big fan. It might come across completely dumb. But then again, so would Temple of Doom. in a lot of ways. 3 stars, although not as good as its predecessors. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull still has the wit and humor of the originals. The action sequences still dazzle, and seeing Harrison Ford again was stunning and welcoming. Well, that's nostalgia, and I don't agree. You just wanted to see him play the role again, but I think that's not enough. He needed to put some heart into it. 2 stars, dull and boring, but the diehards of the franchise will still find it worthy. Yeah, he's almost referring to the previous poster. Um, yeah, 2 stars. 3 stars. Harrison Ford is still just as enthusiastically game in the title role. No, again, I disagree. I'm not going further because I just flat out disagree. Harrison Ford was not enthusiastic. He phoned it in. 3 stars. Man discovers he had a son, so punches Russians in the face. Okay, but 3 stars for that? No, walk it back to 1 if you're going to put it like that. Half a star. Worst of all the indie movies ever made. 3.5 stars. Underrated and overhated. Yeah, okay, but not 3.5 stars. 2.5 stars. While well made, this unnecessary fourth installment comes across as a cartoonish video game hybrid that takes too much pleasure in its shark jumping tendencies. I agree. A little too criticky on the wording, but yeah, it does like jump the shark, but it doesn't know when to make fun of itself when it does it, and so yeah, it kind of fails. 3.5 stars. Despite failing to live up to the first 3 films, Crystal Skull is still an entertaining and reasonably fun film. As long as you ignore the CGI monkeys and the aliens, everything else is pretty good. The action is still good, and now has the added comedic bonus of Harrison Ford making jokes about getting old. Overall, this is a good movie that is simply disappointing compared to the others. I agree mostly, but it's not reasonably fun. It's below reasonably fun. It's more boring, and I don't agree with the stars. I'd walk it back. 3 stars. Not quite the originals, but as true as it could have been. A decent action flick and a nice return. Wrong. It's not quite the originals, right? But as true as it could have been, no. Remember, this is George Lucas's sole thing. He's the one in charge. Harrison Ford is there. Karen Allen is there. No, it's not like it could have been. 4 stars. Honestly, I think this movie is pretty good. I think it gets hated on way too much. I can see why people don't love it, but I just think y'all expected too much. Well, I disagree. We only expected to see what we saw in the other 3 movies, and we didn't get that. I mean, even if I considered the second movie to be subpar, which I don't, but it's my least favorite, even that delivered more entertainment than this. So come on, it didn't have to get, it didn't have to become Raiders of the Lost Ark, the first one. But if it had at least hit as well as Temple of Doom, it would have been watchable for more than one time. No, no. 1 star, Mutt and Fridge, so bad. Okay, nuke the fridge. You're right. It's off-putting if you're not into Indiana Jones humor. Half a star, trash. The worst thing since my son. Okay, your son can't be that bad though, right? I mean, he's your son. 3.5 stars. Hard to live up to earlier films, but entertaining nonetheless. Disagree. 1 star. This is a racist piece of like, what the fuck? Mayans in effing Peru? The Mayans were only located in Mesoamerica, aka Mexico and Central America. Peru is in South America. Plus, if you so desperately needed a native group to talk about, why not the Incas? Like, the awesome civilization that built Chichen Itza and was actually from Peru. Also, seriously, aliens, freaking aliens, talk about cliched and unimaginative. Well, this is certainly the first critique I've seen of, the natives that they put into the film. It didn't bother me because I found it, I took it along with a lot of the other things in Indiana Jones. It wasn't supposed to be historically or archaeologically accurate. it played comic book like fast and loose with that. And so to me, the natives there weren't particularly any type. They weren't supposed to be a type of native. They were just like a generic, hey, they're South American, Central American natives. You also have to keep in mind that, not to bag on America too much, but a lot of Americans don't even know exactly where Peru is. They might think it's in Central America, because Peru is not really a vacation destination for a lot of Americans. I mean, I'm just saying, a lot of people don't know exactly where it's located, so anything south of Mexico to them, it could be anywhere between Mexico and Venezuela. They just don't know where it is exactly. So, hey, let's not read too much into that. 1 star. Never found it Indiana Jones interesting. Okay, then you don't really have anything to say on it. 2.5 stars. 5 out of 10. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull exists. It misses as often as it hits. I don't hate this movie, nor do I recommend it. It just exists. Okay, I kind of agree. 3 stars. Bad script, dialogues, unnecessary CGI, wooden performance, odd Blanchett, and why LaBeouf. Yeah, that's even a little of Shia LaBeouf's off-screen personality and antics coming back to haunt the movie world. That's the thing about actors that don't behave themselves. They get a little too out of hand on their off time. It does kind of color, no matter what the PR people try to spin and the media marketing people do, it does come back on the final product. It does rub people. And that's all I'll say about that. 1 star. This movie is a huge mistake. Should never be done. 1.5 star. Hugely disappointing. 4 stars. It wasn't Raiders of the Lost Ark or Last Crusade, but it's a fun pulp romp that moves the action from the two-fisted adventure of the 40s into the B-movie sci-fi of the 50s. And see, on that I agree. It just wasn't done well. Perfectly in tune with the era, and Ford still shines as Indy. LaBeouf is perfectly engaging as Williams, and seeing Karen Allen again is a delight. The chemistry is still there, the action is still there, and people who complain about things like Mutt swinging through trees or Indy surviving a nuke in a fridge don't understand the tropes. Well, he's right in a lot of ways. The fridge, nuking the fridge, and Mutt, they don't understand the tropes if they're complaining about that. But he is wrong. The chemistry is not there anymore. You're blind if you couldn't see that, in my opinion. 3.5 stars. Personally, I don't understand why this movie gets hated on the most from this franchise. I mean, its overuse of CGI is definitely the only problem I had with this movie. No, and the other 3 movies didn't need all that CGI to be effective. Certainly the first Raiders, like I've said before, it has less special effects than every other movie, and only in the very final scene does that come across as dated. No, 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 no. I don't agree with this at all. 4 stars. If you can't fight Nazis, commies are the next best thing. Indie movies worked best when he travels to different locales in order to finish his quest. There's a lot of Indiana Jones style of fun. Okay, now I'll stop this and I'll bring up another point. I think one reason a big long section of the movie dragged was because it didn't go to different locales. Once the locale moved to Peru, it stayed there a long time and seemed to drag there a long time. In the other movies, particularly in the first movie, he moved around between continents quite a bit. It didn't stay in the Egyptian setting. I mean, that was the longest stretch in the Egyptian setting, but he was bouncing all over the place before that, and you see a total difference in this movie. Um, uh, it's all set and stretched out into Peru, and they don't do a good job of it, in that one location. Now, in the second movie, in the Temple of Doom, yeah, it's all in India, but it's just so bizarre and different from the first movie that you don't notice that he's not traveling all over the place. So, yeah, it's a nitpick. The Peru jungle, scenery, and it just stretches on forever. And despite the fact that you're in a big jungle in Peru, a lot of it came across as being on a soundstage, and it looked like it was shot in a soundstage, like you would have done like even 60 or 70 years ago in Hollywood. Um, and that was kind of off-putting and boring too. There wasn't enough personal charm to overcome that. 2.5 stars. The worst performance by Shia LaBeouf I've ever seen. I've seen worse. So much potential and wasted by casting LaBeouf and Kate Blanchett really ruins the greatness and magic of the other three films. I think Kate Blanchett's performance wasn't bad, but it was a lot weirder than what we've seen her in before. Her Russian accent, it was over the top comic booky, which could have been good, but I think the writing, her dialogue and the writing just wasn't edgy enough. If they had put more of a comic book feel to her character, pumped it up a little more, made it a little more exaggerated, it might have been better. It was weird, but I don't know how to describe it. It just wasn't weird enough. Um, the worst performance by Shia LaBeouf. No, 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 no. I guess, the Transformer movies, you must have been enthralled by the crazy shaky cam and the crazy robots smashing against each other, because there are so many bad parts of the Transformers movies. I mean, they turn into complete dumpster fires after the first one, that you probably overlooked how bad Shia LaBeouf was by himself. I mean, Michael Bay's direction and the camera movements make the Transformer movies so bad that Shia LaBeouf's probably the best thing in it, other than whoever the hot girl happened to be. But no, Shia LaBeouf's performance in the Transformers movies, his first big starring roles, were pretty damn bad. Um, 4 stars. I personally liked this movie. I found it entertaining and the special effects were great. I really liked the story. I loved seeing Harrison Ford return. Overall, it's an entertaining movie with an interesting story that's so underrated. No, it isn't underrated. You're way too forgiving. That's all I can see there. Um, Let's see, 1/2 star. One of the worst movies I have ever seen in my entire life. The ending of the movie is absolute trash and makes you want to get a refund. Yeah, um, I can see your point. 2 stars. The classic sounds plus intentions plus flair are there in this latest chapter of Indiana Jones, but the magic that kept us all at the edge of our seats from the first three isn't. Plus, instead replaced by the lousy cheat code of CGI we've all come to be bored of. Despised since The Phantom Menace. Okay, this plays perfectly into my last episode of Rotten Reviews. Yeah, George Lucas and The Phantom Menace. Here we have George Lucas doing the CGI with this, but um, I don't think he went crazy with the CGI here. I think the choice to use CGI at all is the problem. If he had stuck with practical effects and what had been done in the first Raiders, man, it would have come off so much better. Just using CGI at all was a problem of any type. It shouldn't have been done, and it wasn't that it was overdone or that it wasn't good enough. Any level of CGI, it wasn't needed. 4.5 stars. It's been years since I watched this movie. I last saw it in theaters when it came out in 2008, and yeah, like many, I wasn't thrilled with Aliens, but all the ingredients of a familiar Indiana Jones are here. After watching it again today, this movie rocks. Sure, aliens aren't exactly what many people might have wanted to see in this film, but let's be honest, it's not like Indiana Jones was made for realism. I agree. This is truly a fun movie and delivers all the thrills, okay? No, I disagree mostly because yeah, all the ingredients are there, but it's like you have all the ingredients of an exotic, 5-star meal, and yet, a chef that was half drunk threw it all together and nuked it in the microwave and served it to you. And, it's hard to excuse that from George Lucas. I mean, come on, it's piss poor. 1/2 star. How does one make the perfect movie? Raiders and a few decades later make this trash? Ask Steven Spielberg. Well, if you're going to ask Spielberg, expect him to say that he really didn't do a lot on this movie other than enough to have his name on it. 2.5 stars. Shia was terrible, but it's still Indiana Jones. Uh, yeah, 2.5 stars, I agree, but not just because it's Indiana Jones. If it were just Indiana Jones alone, I would just give it 5 stars. No, no, no. It's got problems. 3 stars. Aliens. Why aliens? It rubs people the wrong way. 3.5 stars. They've chosen to fascinate with the crystal stuff or with the crystal skull. Did it well, then did it more, and went one bit too far since the sci-fi turn taken by this last Indiana Jones ride doesn't fit with the spirit that made the original tetralogy so enjoyable. Yeah, I agree. The crystal skull, even the alien aspect of it, could have been done well, but it wasn't. Um, I'm not going to talk about this garbage. 1.5 stars. Okay, but you kind of talked about it. 3.5 stars. Why is it that I'm always introduced to a franchise with the worst reviewed movie in it to date? Tomb of the Dragon Emperor introduced me to Brendan Fraser's Mummy movies. The crappy Star Wars The Clone Wars movie, 90-minute long theatrically released pilot episode, and introduced me to Star Wars. And I was introduced to the franchise by this movie and the Lego video games that were released around the same time. Whilst I find everyone's merciless assault on this movie, okay, that's just bad luck, but it's also probably being part of a millennial. That's why we have generations. It's likely that the millennials will have their own favorite things that were introduced during their peak fiction consuming years. And yeah, it's hard to get into something that, started off really awesome for, Generation X, for example. Yeah, that's a generational thing. 1.5 stars. How does this have a 77% on the tomato meter? Yes, how does it? What is wrong with these critics? This movie is not fresh, lol. It's cheesy and way too over the top compared to the first three. The writing in the first three movies is noticeably much better, and the whole Kingdom of the Crystal Skull thing just doesn't fit into the indie universe like the other three do, and it doesn't have a satisfying resolution either. Just really lacks a lot of what the other movies had to offer and makes some cheesy, weird decisions. I agree because it brings up something that I might have missed. The resolution of this movie, it is very disappointing. Yes, there's a resolution, something is discovered, and even if it were some type of fantastic plot twist that this was an alien artifact, this crystal skull, which is what they were trying to do but failed to do, even if it were a successful plot twist which had been executed in this film, the resolution after that was shit. I mean, just having everybody step aside while the alien zoomed off into space, and then that's it. I mean, that's pretty piss poor. That's a big letdown. It's like you were going to the climax, and you had this twist, and then you just said, and you just tossed it in the waste paper basket. Because maybe you already had their money. I mean, that's the way it feels. It was very disappointing. The ending, the resolution, bad. 0.5 star, a shame to the Indiana Jones legacy. 4 stars, very fun film, don't understand the hate from some. Goofy CGI moments, but also some great moments. That nuclear blast fridge scene was ridiculous, but I'd give this film a 75%. Well, you gave it like an 80% on your stars, so you're a little off. Goofy CGI, yeah, just CGI that was unnecessary. The nuclear blast fridge scene was ridiculous. It's supposed to be, so it's completely Indiana Jones, as I've said before. 2 stars, although it is very nice to see Ford back as the world's most interesting professor of archaeology. Again, something that's been downplayed. The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull lacks the heart and soul of its predecessors, with uninspired CGI-filled action sequences that fail to deliver any thrills. Again, no tension, and a very forced feeling between the characters. Most of all, however, it's the complete lack of believability pervading the entire film that has the most devastating effect, with the last act really solidifying the sentiment by feeling not only totally out of, I'm guessing he means totally out of place. Again, yeah, you're in Peru, and you don't feel the atmosphere, you don't feel the tension, there's nothing exotic, it just seems like a set location, mostly all CGI. 4 stars, not as bad as people make it out to be. Wrong, I disagree. 4 stars, I've only started watching the Indiana Jones films recently, and overall I've loved them. But when it came to Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, I was nervous because I've had 9 years of hearing nothing but negativity about it. Perhaps it's because I went into this movie with rock bottom expectations that I came out really enjoying it. Yes, there are some silly moments, but the previous three had silly moments as well. This isn't the best film in the franchise, but I don't think it's the worst either. Well, yeah, if your expectations were very low, then it might have passed. Still, I disagree. We're talking 4 stars here. Come on now. Half a star. While visually imperative, it's bland, boring, and a huge letdown to the original trilogy. Stay away from this and go watch any of the first three indie films. 3 stars. Even when he's phoning it in, Spielberg is twice as exciting as the next director, and his usual visual flair carries the movie. No, this was Lucas. Let's move on. 3 stars. Even when he's phoning it in, Spielberg is twice as exciting as the next director, and his usual visual flair carries the movie, even as the plot escapes into the hokey. Well, I'm going to stop it there because no, this isn't Spielberg. This is Lucas. This is all his baby now. So let's not drag him into this. 5 stars. Loved all of them, even this one. Okay. 2.5 stars. The adventure and action thrills are still present, but it lacks serious substance, and the cast does not really work out all that well in the end. Yeah, that's putting it mildly. Lack of chemistry between the cast. 3 stars. That's 3 stars in a foreign language, so I'll skip it. 2 stars. It's the Phantom Menace all over again. No, it's not that bad. I mean, we can go back and review my Phantom Menace Rotten review, but there's no time for that. That's a long one. Let's just say no, I disagree. 4 stars. Harrison Ford was the only reason I watched the movie. Okay, well, if you're just a Harrison Ford fan, you should have bumped it to 5 stars. It was all him. 5 stars. Great movie, just as good as the original three people are just haters. No, and I have a hard time believing that that's a real review or a serious one. 3 stars. Why aliens? An annoying kid, bad CGI, military background in Indiana Jones, also that refrigerator in Nuketown. All valid points, if not stated very abruptly. 1 star. I know it happened time ago, but I just want to say something. This movie killed my childhood hero. Fuck you, Spielberg and Lucas. Well, that's a little harsh. For one thing, Spielberg's not responsible. And if it killed your childhood hero, just pretend like this movie doesn't exist. I mean, Terminator fans have been doing it since Terminator 2. Just pretend like the others don't exist. In fact, um, to help you out, even as the new movie comes out, there is a fifth Indiana Jones movie planned. Perhaps they'll do you a favor and just come out and tell you to ignore the last one. It could happen. It's been done for Terminator. 4 stars. A well-balanced, adventurous film that continues to ride on the same Indiana Jones formula as its predecessors, albeit somewhat less, topped off with several sweeping and terrifically epic action set pieces. Wow, completely disagree. And yeah, it's riding on the Indiana Jones franchise, all right, like riding as an unwanted passenger. 1.5 stars. Lacking all semblance of fun or charm from the oldies, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is weird and boring. Yeah, it is weird and boring. Weird because of the CGI, boring because of the bad writing. I agree. 1.5 stars. Easily the worst Indiana Jones movie so far. I agree. 2.5 stars. What a disappointment. I agree. 1/2 star. Not an Indiana Jones movie. Aliens. Mostly agree. 0.5 star. This movie was so bad it was unbelievable. Don't waste your time even considering it. 2 stars. This movie is really dumb and it doesn't have the magic of its three predecessors. I really don't like it. 3 stars. This movie isn't as bad as everybody is saying it is. It's okay for what it was. Well, it's okay if all you wanted to see was Indiana Jones and it didn't matter, beyond that. Otherwise, no way. 3.5 stars. The Adventure of Indiana Jones is still good, and I was also fascinated by the fact that they chose Latin American myth this time, but the cheesy ending and rather terrible CGI kind of tarnished rather well-established storyline. Um, yeah, actually, the Latin American, South American, um, mythos to the movie, while concocted and not accurate, as previously mentioned in this Rotten review, it was a change of pace. It wasn't biblical. Some people hated that, but it was the CGI. The CGI failed it big time on the setting. Again, it felt like it was on a soundstage. You're supposed to be outdoors in this expansive jungle, and there was no sense of that. It felt like it was all on a soundstage. 2.5 stars. The biggest disappointment of this film is that having waited so long for a sequel to the franchise, this was the result. It feels when you are watching this that the main tenements are present, but it never fully reaches the heights of the first. I felt that the opening sequence was probably the best part of the film and the most Indiana Jones-esque part of the movie, up until the fridge part. Shia LaBeouf gets a lot of flack for this film, but again, I don't necessarily feel it is his fault. He is filling a minor role. Yeah, I don't think this is his worst acting, and I don't think he's responsible. I think just his role and the lack of chemistry with Harrison Ford's character, that's not the actor's fault necessarily. 3.5 stars. Rating 68%, though arguably ruined by a dumb twist and a rehashed storyline. Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is still a lightly entertaining throwback to its vastly superior predecessors. Um, I don't consider it a lightly entertaining throwback. Even a fan service film would have been better. So knock that down to 2 stars, please. 3 stars. I don't dislike this as much as some folks do, probably because I hate Temple of Doom and can take or leave The Last Crusade. It's fair to say that I have a minimal stake in this franchise. That said, I watched this once and realized I could not remember a single thing about it. I have now watched it a second time and cannot remember anything about the last half hour of it. Perhaps my brain just shut down after an hour and a half of this nonsense. My overwhelming impression is that it was very stupid. Again, it is forgettable in a lot of ways. I don't remember long stretches of it because it was boring. And that's the worst thing art can be, right? Boring. 3 stars. It's okay the ending was bad, but the action and some of the joke hit right on. But the other are just so better. This one just was disappointing. Yeah, and it deserves less than 3 stars. 1.5 star. Harrison Ford is as brilliant as ever, but the script, oh, the script. The film never recovers from the fridge scene. Again, the fridge scene's not the problem, but it was all downhill from there, independently of the fridge scene itself. 3 stars. I was so excited when this came out to see Indy on the big screen again and find out what happened to him in the years in between. The first half of the movie I would give 5 stars. I loved the nostalgia. The second half of the movie, however, was horrible. The giant ants, Shia swinging on the vines with monkeys made it unbearable at times to watch. Watch the first hour, then turn it off. I largely agree. I don't know if it's the first hour, but the first act of it, when you're talking about the 3-act structure, the first act was good. I'm not sure if that's quite an hour in, but yeah, the rest it's all downhill from there, and it isn't skiing. 2.5 stars. It's not an awful film by any stretch, but that is not exactly a welcome compliment either. Harrison Ford is uninterested, the plot is bland, and continual references to Jones's age reminds the viewer constantly of a more thrilling and memorable past. Yeah, that's another thing. All the jokes between Harrison Ford and Shia LaBeouf about Ford's age or Indy's age, they do kind of take you out of it in that they remind you that, hey, I saw this guy when he was younger and more vibrant, and even his ad libs were funny. And so, yeah, it is kind of a bad reminder, those age jokes. 4 stars. I may be the only one that likes this movie. I think this movie needs to be rediscovered and see what the haters have overlooked the ones that are really good. I thought Steven Spielberg hasn't lost his touch since he directed the first three movies and still is a damn good director. Harrison Ford is still and always shall be Indiana Jones. Shia LaBeouf isn't as bad as what many people make it out to be. I'm happy to see Karen Allen returning as Marion. The effects by ILM are good. No, I disagree in a lot of ways. Again, Steven Spielberg doesn't have much to do with it. Um, Harrison Ford is Indiana Jones, yes. Um, the effects by ILM are good. Well, I haven't looked it up to see if it was just ILM, but the effects were completely unnecessary and they were not good. I don't know by whose standards you're saying they're good. Even if they had been put in necessarily and they weren't a detriment in of themselves, the effects weren't good. Just on their own, they weren't good. 2 stars. Probably the only Indiana Jones I didn't like. It could have been good, but George Lucas should have done this earlier and made much better characters too. I agree. Why did he wait so long? I don't know if that's because he couldn't get the actors together. I don't know the story on that, but I know that it might be the same thing in Star Wars with Lucas. He waits so long to pick it back up again that maybe his heart's not in it. And hell, the actors definitely, they weren't into it. Ford wasn't. 4 stars. The most underrating of the Indiana Jones films, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull brings back the delightful action with few dull moments, and Harrison Ford shines. The story was interesting as well. Again, I'll have to disagree, not just on the star rating, but there's no delightful action. The only thing we hadn't seen before is the ant hill, the what they're calling the giant ant scene. That was new and refreshing, but again, it just didn't have the tension, and it didn't carry the rest of the film. Um, 3 stars. The Return of Indiana Jones is unfortunately a less than spectacular wet fart. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is ultimately a fun but lacking disposable film. There are certainly things to enjoy here. Once again, the action scenes are creative and interesting, even if they are overly reliant on CGI. Harrison Ford and Karen Allen return and revive some of their chemistry. No, I'll disagree. They don't revive any chemistry. You really wish as a fan that they would, but they don't. And it's some of the worst, long, dragged out stuff in the film, when they're together in the jungle, quicksand and all. 3 stars. This is all right. Got nothing on the originals, but it certainly doesn't suck. It's just very silly and far-fetched. No, wrong. Silly and far-fetched is what Indiana Jones was always. It's got nothing on the originals. That's true, and it does suck. I would give it 2 stars, 2.5. 3 is too much. So that's it, guys. We have Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, a rotten review. Again, a 54% audience score, and I'm only hoping that the next movie, when and if it releases, it can at least rectify the situation. But it was fun, and I'll see you on the next one.